working at. Oh,
welcome to the Mental Health Boot Camp podcast.
Hip hip hooray!
Hip hip hooray! This is the podcast where 4 psychotherapists, 3 of us are Canadian, 1 of us is American, serve you cutting edge mental health knowledge. I am Ryan Howes, a clinical psychologist from Pasadena, California.
And I'm Denis Boyd, a registered clinical counselor from the greater Vancouver, BC, Canada area.
All right. Where's the rest of you guys? Yeah, crickets. Where's everybody else?
Insert cricket noise.
It's the 2 of us tonight.
It's just us. Just us.
It's just the 2 of us. Brooke and Chris are on a little vacation and not able to join us tonight, and that's just fine. Joanna and I get to talk about one of our favorite topics. We're not even going to ambush because it's just the 2 of us. And it's a very timely topic.
It is.
Yeah, it's a timely topic because when we found out that Chris and Brooke were going to be away, I said, hey, no problem. I'll find a guest or 2 and we'll just bring guests on. And you know what happened, Joe?
What happened, Ryan?
I forgot to do that. I didn't write it down. I usually write it down. I didn't write it down. I didn't bring in any guests. And we record so late on Thursday nights that there's no one available. So, yeah, that's right.
Genuine surprise that was actually a plan that had happened, but that's okay. Here we are.
A few weeks ago, I did really have a topic. That wasn't a screw up, really. This one was a screw up. I promised to get some people, I didn't. But it's all right. There are plenty of podcasts out there that have 2 co-hosts and talking about a topic. We can do that for tonight.
We can.
We're going to spend a little time talking about a topic that we both encounter professionally, and I know at least I encounter it personally. I don't know if you do.
I think in some ways, I think it surprises me a little bit because if you knew me and my work habits and my personal space, it's definitely not what you would picture, but I think it gets me in some areas as a surprise. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that topic, of course, perfectionism. Perfectionism. The whole idea that we must be, well, I guess we can define perfectionism, right? Sure. As we usually do with our topics. So perfectionism, I would say off the cuff that is like an internal drive that we have to make sure that everything turns out just ideally, in the most perfect sense, flawlessly. And there's this sense that if it's not flawless, then there's something bad could happen, or that reflects poorly on who I am as a person, right?
Mm-hmm. Or they failed. I'm not good enough. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, not good enough. Not good enough. You know, what's wrong with me? And I'm going to kick myself if it's not perfect. Usually, like, oftentimes perfectionistic standards are pretty high. Like, I need to get it right the first time, and it needs to be 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, then I'm a failure or a fraud, or people will find out that I'm a failure or a fraud or something like that.
The thing is that this ideal of I have to be perfect, or this, is there such thing as perfection? I know you can get 10 out of 10 on a test. You know, you can maybe meet all your, and I think in some ways, when we don't have measurable things that way, perfectionism might be hard to measure, or might be hard to achieve.
I think it is hard to measure because, again, like, how do you measure something like a piece of artwork, or something creative or crafty, even a workout or a paper, or writing some story or essay or report or something like that? When is it perfect? I guess it could be grammatically correct, but does that mean that it's perfect? Still, some people have this kind of deeply held need to make sure that things are perfect, or they're really vigilant about things being perfect, right?
Yes, definitely. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, let's think about where that might come from.
Yeah, I don't, when I see perfectionism or hear about perfectionism in clients, there's it's anxiety is really not far behind, or it's kind of mixed in there a little bit. But
Mhm.
sometimes it comes from younger years, right? Messages they might receive from caregivers or people around them, or maybe it felt really good to get praise, and maybe there's some self-worth put on that now, and so they kind of seek that out, or so.
Yes. Yes. I think it can be coming from, yeah, a lot of those places. I think early life kind of sets the mold for a lot of things in our later life. And I guess the idea that comes to mind for me is like conditional love. Like
Mm,
if you felt like you were only you only got that praise if it was perfect, and if it wasn't perfect, then you would, oh, if there's something wrong with you, you'd be criticized.
right.
Then there's this, that it's kind of paired with perfection. Like it has to be. I'm only good enough. I'm only going to get love. I'm only going to get attention and acceptance if it's
Hmm.
perfect. And that could be, childhood, like school experiences. That could be stuff at home. That could be stuff from your peers or siblings.
Yeah,
But if it's like, if it's not perfect, then I'm no good. That's it's a pretty negative message.
it is for sure. Do you think, where else would it come from other than childhood then? Or do you think it kind of starts back then?
I mean, I think that's a big part of it. So I think I talk about conditional love, and kind of a close neighbor to that would be shame,
Mm,
which we haven't talked much about that, I don't think, yet on the podcast, but kind of a popular conceptualization of shame. Guilt
mhm,
being, I'm I feel bad about what I have done, and
mhm.
shame being I feel bad about who I am. Right?
Okay.
Like it's a real. I've identified with that. Like instead of saying, "Oh, you did that wrong," like a parent might say, "Oh, you did that wrong," instead they say, "You're a bad boy." That's
Mhm,
a shame
mm,
message, right?
mhm.
You are bad.
Yeah.
So you've done something bad. And
Mhm,
so I think that for a lot of folks, perfectionism does come from like a place of shame. Like, oh, if I don't get this perfect, then I am bad. Or I'm trying to ward off my shame or fight back on shame by having a perfect product, because I guess if I do well, then I am good, right?
mhm. Interesting.
So yeah, yeah, I find that those kind of go hand in hand with clients I've seen where perfectionism has been a real sticking point for them.
Mhm,
We can usually dig it back there and figure out, oh gosh, you had messages that you just were bad, like in your essence, at your core, and
mhm.
this is your way to try to fight back against that.
Do you think it could be present if in situations where people might not get those messages from caregivers, and like, you're getting the message, you're loved, all this, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would
Oh,
be?
sure. Yeah, 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 yeah. Certainly not trying to blame caregivers and 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 everyone in the person's early environment for that. But I think what you mentioned before was, someone, maybe it's not so much that they're shamed or it's a conditional love thing for doing imperfect work, but
Mhm,
they get so much praise for doing perfect work. They just love that. It's like, oh my gosh, I really want that so badly that,
mhm,
and I'm afraid of not having it. Maybe I don't know who I'd be if I didn't have straight
right.
A's and
Mhm.
100% on my report cards and stuff like that. So I really want that.
Yeah.
And that's more of a kind of an achievement based
Mm.
identity there, right? I need the gold star, or else I don't, or else I'm not living up to my potential, or
Yeah.
something like that. There's a lot of
Gold
pressure.
star. Yeah, gold star or bust, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I also think that, in a very realistic, so this is all childhood stuff, but I think as we get older, maybe start getting jobs, you're in the work environment, something like that. Certainly there could be cultures there, or just fears that people have. If I don't do a perfect job, I could get fired. And that is actually a reality in some
Yeah,
jobs.
for sure.
So it makes a person kind of hyper vigilant, we would say, like
Mhm,
very, very aware of any sort of flaw, because, oh my gosh, if I don't do perfect, then I could get fired, and then I can't pay my bills, and then
mhm. Yeah.
catastrophizing from there, right?
I think I had a client today, and just note to any talking about clients, it's usually, yeah, everything's confidential in terms, no names are used for people who might be
Yes.
curious, or um but there was a almost a perfectionist desire based on what other people expected from them, thinking that other people expected them to look a certain way or to be put together. And that was something they tried to be other people from an early age, tried to model after people, and they actually don't really know much themselves what they're like. But um, they're just trying to make decisions about simple things. What am, or not simple things, big things, but like my next job, that's a big thing. Or do I go to school, university? And it's just this fear of doing the wrong thing, because will it be the way they hope it will be? Will other people still see them in that same way? And they're very aware that they have perfectionistic tendencies, but it's just, it consumes them, and it's one wrong step. So now they just don't make any decisions because there's that fear. I don't know if that would fit um,
Oh, sure.
in all aspects, but it's one area, right? It's not just kind of, yeah, job focused of doing a good, or test focused, etc. But yeah, perceptions, living up to certain ideals.
Yeah,
Mhm.
sure. I don't want to let people down, right? I don't want to tarnish my reputation or uh, make people think poorly of me, right?
Right.
So yeah, I guess that could all just be based on kind of where you are, like what are your highest values, your highest concerns in that moment or at that time, you know?
Mhm.
Do I
Mhm.
need to have food on the table? I need to have this job, you know? I'm just thinking about pleasing the boss, I guess, or making
Mhm.
sure that I don't show any flaws there. Or if your friend group is, gosh, the most important thing and they have
Yep.
some expectations, you don't want to let them down either.
Mhm.
I'll also throw out a word um, which we'll need to unpack a little bit, and that is like an insecurity.
Okay.
Um, and I don't say that in any negative sense. I mean, just in a pure sense of I don't feel very safe or secure in this moment or in this relationship or in
Mhm.
this place. And so it's the worker who feels like they're they could be fired at their first mistake. That is an insecure place to be.
Mhm.
You know, if you're at a job where everyone makes mistakes and the bosses understand that and recognize it and say it's fine, you're learning, you know,
Mhm.
keep growing,
Mhm.
then then you're going to feel more secure. Like, okay, I have freedom to make a mistake here and there. It's not the end of the world. Um, if you're in a relationship where you're with a person who is highly critical of you,
Yep.
uh, and every time you make a mistake, they notice it, they point it out, and they put you in the doghouse, then that's going to make you feel insecure, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And then I'll say on one more level, which is like a personal feeling about yourself, even because a lot of people aren't really sure about how they feel about themselves. We do a lot of time, spend a lot of time in therapy trying to help people love themselves or talk to themselves nicer or you know
Mhm.
have a better self-image. And if you don't feel if you feel like you yourself are always on the brink of failing yourself,
Yep.
then that could cause that kind of insecurity too, can it?
Definitely. For sure. I think that feeds into it quite a bit.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I think the kind of perfectionism I see. I'm trying to think about. I haven't thought of this before. Like, I think the way it's introduced to me a lot of times is um, looking at like a specific task. Like I had a paper to write and I hit send, but oh, I forgot to correct a few things, and oh, I beat myself up with my perfectionism. Right?
Yeah. I hear clients saying when they were trying to fall asleep at night, and that's usually when a lot of these wonderful thoughts kind of come in,
Yep.
is they, yeah, go over, relive all these conversations with people, and or the things said or done, and they're kind of
Ah,
tormented a little bit by um, yeah, rethinking those things. And did I say the right thing, or now what do they think of me? And yeah, I feel like that we have those thoughts a lot of the time, and it's not necessarily just for people who worry about perfectionism, but I think it is tied into it a little bit for sure. So
Well. We were ambushed, it turns out.
A bit of a late ambush, it would seem.
Yes, welcome.
Thank
We
you.
we have a guest partway through here, and it's Denis Boyd, Chris and I's dad. So welcome, Pop.
Good to be here. How are you two doing?
Oh, doing
Good.
well. Doing
Excellent.
well.
Yeah, good.
We're in the midst of talking about perfectionism,
Oh my.
and Ryan talked a little bit about bringing shame and guilt into that, and talking about insecurity. And so we're kind of just, yeah, we come across this in our work, and so
Yeah,
thought it'd be an important topic.
great topic. Did you come to some conclusions around how people end up getting in that perfectionistic channel at some stage in their lives? And
We talked about a couple ideas. One was that maybe that some people maybe grew up in an environment where kind of perfection was expected of them, and maybe they were experiencing some like conditional love, where it was like, if you don't get 100%, then you're going to be punished. I'm going to shut you out somehow, right? And other ideas being that even later on in life, maybe with a critical partner or in a job environment where people are getting fired all the time for making mistakes, that can make a person feel pretty insecure. And then just kind of a personal insecurity as well, of like, if you have a hard time loving and accepting yourself, then you're going to be kind of measuring yourself based on how well have I done, how good did I do on this?
right.
Yeah.
I always liked Rudolf Dreikers, the Adlerian, who had brought the phrase, whether it was his or somebody else, that we have to have the courage to be imperfect. And that, and by accepting imperfection and that our humanity, that it takes a lot of stress off us. And because I think we all, in spite of our good attempts, have our foibles and our weaknesses. I certainly have mine. And normalizing that a bit for ourselves, I think, takes a bit of pressure off too. We're all a work in progress. And I'm not sure we can overcome that insecurity necessarily by self-love. I think that our profession is really good at promoting that perception or that pitch.
Uh-huh.
But I think some of the most secure, happy people I know are fairly detached, and they're very much focusing on loving other people and making their, not in a dependent way, so to speak, but in a way that really builds community, builds relationship. And there's rich spiritual traditions that promote that approach as well, of course. So, but we certainly have to value ourselves and take care of ourselves, because we can't do much of anything if we're getting too tired and too wasted and whatnot. So it's an interesting challenge for sure.
I like that a lot, Dennis. And I think that's spot on. That really, I've heard people say that when you're giving to others and receiving that, that the good feeling that you have of like, wow, this is really nice to be contributing to someone else's life, that feels kind of incompatible with the self-hate. It's like, how can you, if you're producing something that's good and making other people happy, how could you be an awful person, right? So there's something that's generative about that.
Yeah, indeed. But I think where the detachment comes in, I think, is if I'm trying to be good to my neighbor and I'm waiting for that positive feedback, I'm being an altruistic humanist there, and it may not work. If they don't give me the feedback, I could be pretty disappointed. Whereas if I just do it out of love for them or humanity or whatever, that there's that piece that tends to come with that. It's very paradoxical. I find it very interesting, but it leads to better community for sure.
Oh, sure. That's
We
great.
have a neighbor who we share driveways, and we have some very large trees in our front yard, big Douglas firs, and these trees drop needles and cones all over the place. And every once in a while I'll go out and blow the driveway. And I tended to blow. The woman next door is a single parent on her own, and I tend to blow her driveway. But last few times I haven't bothered to do it, and I just left it, and she didn't do it either. So it's become very messy. And I was out there the other day, and I got thinking, why don't I just blow her driveway? And I realized why I hadn't. She had cut back some hedge between our yard, just murdered the trees, so that it's affected the privacy. And I think on some level I was carrying a little grudge there. And I managed to overcome myself foible there, and you know what, it was great. Got her done, felt great. Um, I had to convert there, a little sort of stretching into loving when I didn't necessarily feel like doing it, and I did a perfect job though, so that helped a lot.
Huh.
Hence the perfectionism. There we go. Oh, that's great.
Well, what if we have people, you know, there's that a little bit of that maybe, like you said, Dad, sometimes expecting that response or that, yeah, from someone, acknowledgement. But how about if we're, you know, someone who might deal with perfectionism and there's individuals who are trying to tell them, you don't have to be that way, or this is not what we're expecting, or, you know, it's what you're doing is good enough and you are good enough. What makes it difficult for that person to still not, yeah, take that in? Or for them, how would we recommend they really, yeah, work at tackling their perfectionism and those tendencies?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you want to explain it, and of course it bounces off. Maybe there's a place where you could remember the old "what's the worst could happen if you weren't, you know, perfect?" Well, people would this and that, and they pursue that to the point where they realize there's nothing really that negative that is going to happen. So there may be a bit of that, but I'd be tempted to ask them about times when they didn't feel perfect, and maybe some examples of where they were doing things, and that they judged to be imperfect, and then maybe ask them how others around them would have judged those same things if they'd known a little more about them. Would they have seen it the same way? And maybe just coming at it from more experiential place might help, Joe. I don't know.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah, it's just throwing some thoughts out there, some ideas out there. Yeah.
yeah.
I think there are two, I guess, alternate terms I like to work with people on. One being excellence instead of perfection, or not, maybe not even excellent, but just doing your best, right?
Yeah.
Doing the very best you possibly can. Maybe that turns out perfect in some way. Maybe it is 100 out of 100 on the exam, or maybe it's not. But you tried your hardest, and that in itself could be more satisfying, I guess, for some people.
Mhm.
And then the other, which is an even maybe a little lower bar, is the good enough, right? Which is this whole
Right.
idea from Donald Winnicott, the good enough mother or the good enough parent, where there's a lot of pressure at points in history for parents to be perfect, and I think that's consistent today. You know, parents still feel like, oh, I have to do everything perfectly, or else my kid's gonna resent me, or they're gonna have a problem growing up, or something like that. And this whole idea that, well, really, as a parent, you don't need to be perfect. In fact, there is no real way to measure perfect as a parent. And in fact, sometimes if there are some lapses in parenting, if the kid isn't fed exactly when they're hungry, or if they aren't soothed exactly the way they need to be soothed every time, then maybe that helps them build some resilience, and helps teach the kid to self-soothe, or to take care of themselves in some way. So the idea of good enough can actually, that is excellent when it comes to parenting.
Mhm.
And you know, there's some jobs where, you know, I want excellence or close to perfection. If I have brain surgery, I want that brain surgery to go really darn well, you know.
Yep.
But if it's about trimming the hedges in my yard, I'm fine with good enough. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
fine. It's okay, you know.
Yeah,
Okay.
you want your brain surgeon to be in the top part of his graduation class, preferably right up near the 80, 90, 80, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Way up there. So I guess in you know, Joe, you mentioned, like, if you've got a client who's is concerned about perfectionism and having a hard time taking in maybe some of the feedback they're getting from other people. Well, you know, gosh, this is fine, or you're doing a great job, or,
Yeah.
you know, no, you're not on the brink of losing your job. You're one of our top performers. And
Mhm.
still they're continuing to kind of ruminate and worry themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And there's the piece that this person in particular, they would, you know, do something and feel it's not good enough and do it again. But there's also a flip side where I've also heard that people, it kind of this focus on perfectionism actually creates avoidance and procrastination, and not even bothering to start it because they already think it's not going to be good enough or they're not going to succeed at it. And so you have the it's kind of it's a spectrum a little bit. Yeah, they're not even able to engage in it because they've already made up their mind, or it's too stressful to think about the idea of not getting perfect.
Do you think there's a fear under there somewhere, that there's a fear that if they don't do it perfect by however they define that, there's a painful consequence of sorts for them? There must be some sort of fear there.
Yeah.
Rejection or whatever, that it's
Yeah.
probably an irrational fear, but do you think if they could identify the fear, it might help with the motivation?
I'll sometimes ask clients, whose voice does that sound like, or whose voice does that remind you of?
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
And they've got that critical, voice, like, oh, you've got to get it perfect. Who does that
Mhm.
remind you of? Was that your second grade hockey coach? Was that your grandmother? Who was that? Does that remind you of? And oftentimes they're able to say, you know what, that sounds a lot like my older sister, something like that.
Yeah.
And then we could say, okay, so if that's your older sister's voice, and how would you like to respond instead?
Mhm.
What kind of a message would you like to tell yourself? Oh, it's okay, you're doing good enough. Everyone says you're doing fine. So just distinguishing that sometimes could be helpful for people.
Totally. I like that.
Janita Fisher talks about we're parts. Each of us is a part. There are several parts to us. I have a client I'm seeing now who's going back to work after a bereavement, a serious, heavy loss, and she is a bit of a perfectionist at work. She tries really hard. What she knows, though, about going back is she has to improve her boundaries. So there's a part of her that I call Super Sally, and her first name's Sally, and then we got to make sure Super Sally does, because there's a sensible Sally too. And then there's the little girl Sally, who is the one who probably wants to do things perfectly, and to help her to see that these are different parts of who she is. And it was interesting because I was teasing her about Super Sally, worrying about this or that. And then sensible Sally showed up and kind of calmed down Super Sally. And so what you're saying there, that voice, I think within us, we have different voices that we can sort of call upon to balance things out a bit, if you like. And that it's not, one voice doesn't have to necessarily take over, although when we're tired, maybe the little boy or little girl voice is going to take over more. I don't know, but I found that rather an interesting way of kind of dissecting it a bit.
I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's great. Sure.
And your comment about it, you don't have to achieve so much. It's not the goal so much as the effort you put in. I love it when parents do that. All I want is some effort, and whatever it turns out to be, I'm sure that's the measuring stick. Putting in a bit of effort, the result is less important. It's brilliant parenting. I'm sure you do that, Ryan.
I try.
There's living proof right there.
Oh, let's not unpack that.
We're not going to get into family therapy.
No, you were there for my procrastination, talking about in the procrastination episode. I have my, anyways, but no, you definitely encouraged effort, and we're very supportive in that way. You and mom both. So, but anyways, I always have work to do, as we all do, but yeah.
Another thing, Dennis, as you mentioned about, I guess, faith traditions and kind of the emphasis on giving and giving to your community and loving one another, that sort of a thing. And another sort of faith concept that I like to throw out there is grace. There are people who are oftentimes very much focused on, like the letter of the law. I have to get this done right every single step of the way. And the ability to kind of expand your capacity for grace, extending grace to yourself. You know what? I don't have to do it all today. I don't have to do it all 100% right now. I can have a little bit of leeway here. It's kind of a hard concept for some people to grasp onto, because they're so used to shooting for 100%. Right. But gosh, when you can really get good at kind of accepting, giving and accepting grace, it could be very, very helpful.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Yeah. Yes.
To be more graceful.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. To extend that.
maybe even grace-filled on occasion.
Mm.
It's out there. Maybe they just plugging into it.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Also, just another side note to that, kind of on a similar note, a common thing that I've done as a therapist as well is talk about, if this was your best friend who was dealing with this issue or had made this little mistake over here, how would you be talking to her? And it's usually a dramatically different conversation they would have, right?
Yeah.
We're oftentimes so much more equipped to give that grace, extend that grace to other people than to ourselves.
Definitely. And I think whenever, I bring up that with clients as well. And it's that they're so quick to come up with all these supportive things they would say to a friend in that situation. But they're like, but for me, I just can't tell myself that, or I hold myself to a different level. Right. And you hear that across the board. Right. And so it's like, what is that? Is there a feeling that goes along with it? Is there a felt sense in the body that lets you know that this is not okay, or I need to do something different, or what's the difference there? Where you could have the cognitive thought, you could identify if it's rational or not, but there's the, why are we harder on ourselves in that way? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. I think there's something, just touching on the spiritual there, the best preacher preaches the homily, not with his words, but with his life, with his actions or with her actions. And so if I'm going to encourage others to do this or that, if I realize that my modeling that for them is a gift to them, then I'm doing my adjustments, not so much for me or fighting with me anymore. I'm doing it as a way of helping my friend or child or whatever through example. So I can't seem to do it for myself, but if I can do these things differently, then it becomes part of me as well. Maybe there's a bit of room for that too, so that we try to be an example of what we teach, right? Like if we're teaching people how to manage stress, we should be giving it a reasonably good shot ourselves, even though it's an ongoing challenge. Yeah.
That's a great point. That's right.
Yeah. So
if I guess, yeah, that kind of goes to like the motivation. Okay, if you're more motivated to give to others, fine. Give them an example of being gracious and being gracious to yourself and being self-forgiving, and then maybe that's some way to kind of sneak in the back door there.
maybe. Well, try it, Joe.
Sorry, you said give it a try.
Sure.
I'll report back.
Yes. I guess another piece of this is maybe just kind of a reframing, I've been perfectionistic with things that I write and things that, if I'm throwing someone a birthday party or something like that, I want to make sure it's all great. If I'm hosting something, I want to make sure it goes really well. And then I start beating myself up for that. And it's sometimes helpful for me to just reframe and go, okay, I'm feeling this way because I care. I really want this to go well. I care about this and I want this to matter and I want it to be. And if I kind of break it down into what that's really about for me, I care about this person. I want them to have a good time at the party. I care about this paper. I want it to be well received. Then that kind of changes the focus. Instead of it's got to be perfect to this matters to me. This is important to me. And that's it helps me relax a little bit.
Yeah.
And take the emphasis on perfection and just onto wanting it to go well, Yeah.
Could we make a case for perfectionistic thinking being a pretty good example of irrational thinking? That it is an irrational type of thought to have, because in reality, none of us can really be perfect. We're all a work in progress. And if we can categorize it even sometimes as irrational, then I go to the emotionally focused people again, who that tells me right away your stress levels are high. My likelihood to have perfectionistic thoughts for myself or others is going to be much higher when my stress levels are high. If I'm really tired, if I'm not taking care of myself. So it goes back to what emotions am I not dealing with? what tears have I not shed? What anger do I need to get out of my system so that my brain doesn't go to that perfectionistic place? I wonder if there can't also be a link there.
Like in a way that people try to cope with some of those emotions, right? Like if they're stressed or dealing with a lot, do you feel like some people kind of focus on something that they might be able to control, like something to hone in on a little bit?
Well, I think we do try to control our emotions. I think we were all brought up in our generation anyway to do that, put it
Mhm.
away and push on, as you've heard me say. And so we've ended up getting a lot of very stressed out people who don't legitimately allow their upset to come out because it's seen as weakness or whatever. So that accumulation of tension is going to distort the way I think, and it's going to make my goals unrealistic, perhaps. Or so I was thinking of it from that. But then feeling out of control with the emotion, the best way to get rid of that is to share it and write it down or
Yeah,
whatever
for
to
sure.
regain control.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that might be a cleaner way to try and cope with that. I don't know.
definitely. I think definitely a cleaner way. I think I was just pointing out like how sometimes people might try to control things. They feel so out of control in certain areas, and there's something to focus their attention on. Not saying it's the healthiest thing to do, but
Yeah.
I think it's quite common. But
Right.
it's yeah.
The other part of that is if I'm so busy controlling my emotions and keeping my story inside as a way of coping, I'm going to control you too. I end up controlling my environment. So there could be a ripple effect too, maybe.
Mm.
Hmm.
Mm.
So,
Right. And then
Yeah.
if I'm controlling my environment, I'm controlling the people around me, that could actually have this detrimental effect of its own. Now I'm burning bridges. Now I'm making
Yeah.
enemies.
Is that
Now
true?
people
Eh?
don't want to be around me. And now all of this work I'm doing to try to be perfect, it's actually driving people away, right?
It's backfiring big time. Yeah.
Mhm.
For the cognitive thinking there, Pop, are you thinking that some of those distortions, like labeling, like if they don't do well, they say I'm a failure. If I don't get perfect, I'm a failure. Or the all or nothing thinking, I have to be perfect or bust. Like anything short of great is not, that kind of is that overgeneralization, or that'd be all or nothing, I guess. But some
Yeah.
distortions in there that we could help a client identify and start to see what's kind of rational and not rational, like you said.
Yeah, I think the CBT in us would say, okay, well, let's make that thought a little more or less distorted. But what I'd probably also go into is, so how are you doing? What's been going on lately? Any losses? How are your stress levels? Because sure enough, there's a half a dozen things they're not talking about that have built up and caused that. So we don't have to do all that work to reframe and rewrite the rational thought because the emotion that created is dissipated somewhat.
Okay. You're talking about the perfectionism as a defense mechanism, or as something to kind of deflect away. Like I'm going to focus really hard on getting this little thing right in order to sort of avoid this bigger problem that I have over here. Kind of a deflection in a way.
Could be a bit of that. I may not have the insight, though, the other problems there. I'm
Yeah.
just caught up in this irrational goal or process because the stress, when it's big, it just distorts our our thoughts, as we know. When you're tired, you don't talk properly. But I was thinking of it along those lines as well.
Dennis, you jumped into our podcast halfway through, not even knowing what the topic was. So, and it's late on a Thursday night, so you are certainly allowed to have an imperfection once in a while.
Thank you.
And in fact, it's been such a pleasure and joy to have you with us because you're adding a lot to the conversation, as always. I love it.
Well, it's a treat to pop in. I was on another call that just ended a bit ago, and so I thought, well, what a nice opportunity to visit with you guys. So anytime.
Visit with us and the wide body of listeners we have on 6 of 7 continents now. My goodness.
Wow, it's really expanding. That's good.
Yeah. Happy to be doing it.
Good stuff.
Well, let's wrap up for now. Again, Dennis, thanks again for coming. So happy to have you here and adding to the conversation. But that's it for tonight. Please like and subscribe on Apple, Google, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, all those places. Tell a friend or two. You don't have to be perfectionistic about it, though. If you don't tell a friend or two, you can extend grace to yourself. That's okay. And that's it. Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Thank you for being
everyone.
here.
Take care.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone. Good night, everyone.